All right, here we go. Hi, everyone. This is Achutabhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today I'm doing a live stream. We are going to take a look at some of your birth charts in relation to today's eclipse in the sign of Sagittarius. I thought this would be a fun way to do content today, get online with some of you guys and take a look at your charts and maybe give you some tips for interpreting eclipses in your birth chart. So I'm going to be taking some volunteers to look at birth charts with as we go on here. This should be a good way to spend our eclipse day. I hope you're having a good one. I have a couple of funny stories to share today about my some of my Mars and Cancer experiences. I've been sort of gathering them into like every time that a Mars and Cancer story happens, I've been sort of jotting it down in my head, and I've been preparing to share them with you guys. So some of them are so hilarious and just so Mars and Cancer. So I'm excited to share a little bit about that today. Also going to talk about the difference between a South Node eclipse and a North Node eclipse, refresh a little bit on the nodes themselves. So we'll do a little bit of that. And then, like I said, I'd be glad to pull charts from the audience and take a look at how the eclipse is affecting you. So we'll take some time for that as we go along. Before I dive into everything, you guys know I'm in promotion mode right now for my upcoming program. My new program, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic, begins in June. I'm going to pull it up on the screen right now and show it to all of you so that you can see it. It is a one-year program in ancient astrology. It's a great class. I've brought a couple of thousand people through it now. I've been teaching different versions of this program for 10 years now. So it has a lot behind it, a lot that's gone into it. Okay, let me put it up on the screen and show you. Here's my website, nightlightastrology.com. If you go to the courses tab and click on the first year course in particular, and then you can scroll down and learn all about it. We are just a couple of weeks away now. I think we're like under 3 weeks before the program starts. It's a program that is focused on Hellenistic astrology, the techniques and methods and philosophy of ancient astrologers, as well as it's really by the end we're also blending in all of the greatest aspects of modern archetypal psychology or psychological astrology. So you get really kind of getting a blend of, really valuable counseling style astrology alongside of the kind of heavy machinery of ancient astrology, the sort of karmic predictive science that ancient astrologers had. So to me, it's been a total revolution in my practice to learn ancient astrology, to be able to really accurately predict what kinds of events or themes are happening, having that really specific, focused ability to predict karmic seasons in people's life, and then also to be able to unpack the inner archetypal structures of those seasons and talk about them in terms of our internal life and our psychology. So that's what the program is aimed at. There's about 30 classes on the year. They're all 2 to 3 hours each, about 100 hours worth of content. We have 12 guest lecturers that come in throughout the year. There are breakout study sessions after every module, so you get lots of tutoring help if you need it. Everything's recorded, so you can attend the webinars live on Sundays at noon Eastern, or you can watch them afterward. They're held on an online portal for you. So tons of bonus content, homework, optional homework, and reading and so forth. A lot of tutorials if you need help with things. So be sure to check it out if you're interested in studying more. The early bird payment saves you $500 off. There's a 12-month payment plan and tuition assistance for people who are in need. We try to make sure that our programs are really super accessible, never like to price anyone out. I think probably 50 or 60% of our students are people who otherwise couldn't afford to take a serious astrological training program and are using the need-based tuition. So if people are able to benefit because of that, it makes me really happy. So feel free to check that out. Yeah, you save a lot on the early bird too. Well, thank you guys for letting me, take away a few of your minutes here before we get into the good stuff. So I am going to just refresh now on exactly what's going on in the astrology today. I'm going to pull up the real-time clock and show you guys. We're going to talk about, just kind of refresh on the eclipse today. And then we're going to also kind of talk about the meaning of the nodes of the moon a little bit from the standpoint of ancient astrology, talk about a south node lunar eclipse, how that's differentiated from a north node solar eclipse. And then we'll unpack some of your birth charts. If I have some brave volunteers, I will take a look at your birth chart and try to give you, everyone, some tips on interpreting eclipses and birth charts, and do that through demonstrations. So, okay, here is the real-time clock, and I'm still getting used to like all my new equipment and stuff like that. I have two screens for the first time in my life. I've always had one screen, and I can't tell you how helpful it is to have two when I have so many open windows all the time, like my astrology software and this and that. So, wow, it's been like a serious revelation. Someone was like, well, why don't you just get two screens? Because like, I think I need like a really big screen. And they're like, or just get two on a mount. And I was like, they do that? like I did not know. So anyway, okay, so you should be able to see the, let me just make sure. I'm going to switch over to my YouTube. Okay, good. You can see it. By the way, roll call. I haven't done roll call today yet. Where are you all coming from? Where do you all live? I'd love to know where you're tuning in from in the chat box as well. That always makes me really happy to find, well, people are coming from what country or what state or whatever. So seeing someone from India, Indonesia, or maybe that's some birth information. Yeah. Don't put your birth info in yet. I'm not asking for it quite yet, just so that you know. Colorado, District 4, Seattle, Washington, Milwaukee, New York, Orlando, Shreveport, Louisiana, Victoria, wow, Maine, New Hampshire, Bay Area, New Zealand, Taiwan. Oh my God, I just love seeing that. It's like, how is this even real? When I started my astrology career, if you would have told me that I'd be able to develop an international audience, I'd been like, that's a little crazy. Like I wasn't YouTube like developing huge, international following on YouTube was not even an idea in my head at that point. So anyway, really cool to share space with you guys today. All right, enough blabbering. So now let's take a look at what's happening. So we have our eclipse just passed this morning, May 26th. For some of you, it would have been last night, or it's evening. It would have been evening as it was happening. You can always tell it's a lunar eclipse. Lunar eclipses are always full moons. And so the full moon is always exactly opposite the sun. You can see the moon's at 8 Sagittarius. The sun is at 5 Gemini. So it's just passed over. So happy full moon to everybody. Happy full moon lunar eclipse. I tend to think that lunar eclipses are more potent if they're actually visible in the area that you're in, but also if they're visible in the area of your birth. I think both are they seem like reliable ways of gauging the potency of an eclipse, either if you're viewing it where you are living, even if it's not visible in your birth area, or if it's not visible in your area, but it is in your birth area. Either seem to be signs of its potency. Anyway, okay, so the lunar eclipse obviously is in Sagittarius, hosted by Jupiter, and the moon is in a square with Jupiter, so there's what we call reception between the two. If there's an aspect between a planet and its ruling planet or its host, that means that there is reception. It's kind of like if, I'm a guest in your house and you happen to like me, or you happen to be available to, serve me while I'm in your home, the likelihood that things go well is a lot better. So this eclipse is not the worst in the world, in terms of people being scared of eclipses and eclipses having this kind of ominous feeling around them. I don't feel that this one is so bad, with the eclipse being in Jupiter's sign, Jupiter being happy in its own domicile, just having entered Pisces, there being reception between the two of them. So I want to break this down a little bit more for us by virtue of talking about the nodes and what they represent overall, and then what the south node represents individually. So one of the best ways of thinking about the nodes of the moon, and I'm just going to turn off my screen share now. One of the best ways of thinking about the nodes of the moon is in terms of like a giant serpent or snake in the sky. The path of the nodes is kind of like circular. The path of the moon is sort of circular relative to the ecliptic line of the sun. So every month the moon is snaking upward above. There's this like big, broad ecliptic line path of the sun in the sky, and the moon sort of snakes up above it and then comes down below it. And as it's doing that, when it intersects going upward, and the moon is rising above the ecliptic line of the sun, so it's going up in the sky toward the pole star, toward the unchanging northern star. That for ancient astrologers, that was called the ascending node, or the head of the dragon, or Rahu in Indian astrology. And it's a point, not a planet. Of course, in Indian astrology, it's considered sort of like a shadowy planet. But this ascending point of the moon, when it crosses that ecliptic mark, and it happens to be near the sun at the time of a new moon within a certain number of degrees, that will create a solar eclipse. If it were to be ascending across that point at the time of a full moon within a certain number of degrees, that will create a lunar eclipse. And the same thing goes for the south node, which is going to be the opposite point in the zodiac, exactly opposite the north node's point, where the moon is descending across that ecliptic line, going down. And as it crosses going down, it's called the descending node, or the south node. And the basic reason for that is that when it's descending across that line, it's heading toward the southern horizon. So we call it the south node, or the descending node. Whereas when it's crossing upward, it's going up toward the north, or toward the pole star. So we call it the ascending or north node. Now, that winding path that the moon takes, when you trace it out in the sky, it like undulates. So it has the classic kind of yin-yang dynamic in terms of the sun's path being a straight line and the moon's path being kind of a serpentine coiling line around that straight line, which is of course very tantric. It's a part of many. It's that symbolic visual is a part of many different traditions, religious and spiritual, philosophical traditions, to take note of that interplay between the one and the many, the masculine and the feminine, the active and the passive or receptive. So those are the nodes of the moon invoke this classic image of the interplay between light and dark, yin and yang, masculine and feminine. So it's very important to understand the basic difference between the sun and the moon in ancient astrology in order to understand both what the moon means, and then what the nodes mean, and then what eclipses mean. The sun, broadly speaking, is related to this idea of the ideal form or image of something. So the archetypes themselves are, in a sense, solar. They represent, almost like in the Platonic sense, they represent the ideal toward which action is aimed or intended. I have an ideal image of what I want, my office to be, perhaps, or I have an ideal image of what I'd like, my family life to look like, or, and all of us have this, sometimes rather unconsciously. Our ideals motivate action. And sometimes we also fear certain images. We fear certain scenarios that we have an idealized sense of the worst case thing that could happen. So we work off from these kind of these images, and the ideal image of the higher self would be like Christ, the Buddha, the saints, the enlightened world, or the enlightened individual. And that's kind of the pinnacle of all images: the good, the true, the beautiful, the just. And so that's in a sense, that's the sun, which is why we look at the sun in a birth chart in order to understand what is our ambition in life, what is our sense of purpose broadly speaking, for the course of the life itself. On the other hand, the moon is going to represent the images, the images as they come into and out of being, in material form that comes and goes, that grows and decays and withers and passes away, that comes into being and goes out of being. The images, the Ade, are eternal, they're timeless, whereas the lunar represents the forms that are impermanent, that come and go, the reflections of the Ade. Now, this material world was said to be part of the sublunary sphere, which means it happens below the moon, and everything in this world is always a fluctuating stream of circumstances, which is why astrology is so remarkable, because you have philosophers in the ancient world who are clearly interested in the eternal forms, and they're sort of poo-pooing the world. They're like, yeah, this world temporary, let's talk about the eternal stuff. What makes astrology so unique as a philosophical movement in the ancient world is that there's this belief that says, no, we should be able to track the unfolding or the manifestation of the Ade, the divine archetypes, in and through form. We should be able to describe them and predict them according to their fluctuations and movements here, because they somehow come into matter and go out of matter, and we should be able to predict them, describe them, talk about them. And so there's this notion that these ideal forms and patterns come into and out of being in this fluxional world. And the moon represents that fluxional world. And this is why the moon is the primary planet of prognostication in ancient astrology, especially in horary, for example, which is much more clearly divinatory. I think all astrology is divinatory, but it's very obvious that horary is a divinatory form of astrology, whereas other forms, it can be a little confusing. Anyway, that's a whole different conversation. The point is that the moon is going to be the ruler of flux, change, impermanence, the developing circumstances around us, the change of environmental circumstances. So that's really important to understand, because in our birth charts, for example, you look at the sun, you get a sense of purpose. You look at the moon, you get a sense of environment. The purpose that you have for your life has to interact with and be helped or hindered by the environment. So the sun-moon dynamic in the birth chart, as well as the phasal dynamic between the sun and the moon, are hugely important. This is a really big portion of what we study in my programs. Now, on that note, what does it mean when you have an eclipse? Well, an eclipse can be of two kinds. You can have a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse. Now, on a solar eclipse, you're at a new moon where the sun is, in a sense, impregnating the moon with its divine seed, its divine image, its intention, or whatever the image might be. And the image is determined by the zodion, that means the sign, the house, the aspects, the dignity. But every time you get a new moon, the two come together, and the intention is seeded into the environment. And then throughout the cycle, as the moon gestates and moves forth in her phases, getting to full and then back to new, the unfolding of circumstances relative to the seeding image unfolds in the cycle. And if we pay attention to that and we track that, we slowly get to understand the soul, who is the one desiring and setting the intentions. And then we get to understand our karma, which is the reactions and circumstances that come up in relation to the desires. So this is truly a profound science to study, that can, such an asset to a spiritual practice if you're studying it in the way it was intended to be studied. So when we get to a solar eclipse, what we're talking about is the replacing of an image that's been with us for a while, a long while, because eclipses come in cycles of 9 and 18 years. So you're talking about a seeding image that's profoundly different. It's really shifting an ideal or an ambition or a pursuit or an intention of some kind. And that's on the solar eclipse. And then it's sort of seeding that with the moon, which will then go forth and gestate. Now, the lunar eclipses are a little different. That is when circumstance, and the way that circumstance has been interacting with our lives, with intentions in different areas of our lives, with the divine images that guide our actions in different areas of lives. The circumstances blossom, they fructify. So it's karma, it's reactions from previous choices and environmental circumstances and environmental flux that comes in and radically alters the course of our destiny. The destiny meaning the actions that we follow according to an image that we have. So the destiny is altered by changing circumstances, and it's usually more dramatic changes in circumstance. It feels like it's outside of our control. It's like feels like it's the hand of fate coming in and shifting everything around. And that is essentially what we're having when we have a lunar eclipse. Every full moon is like that, though. I'm pretty sure I just swallowed a bug. It's like this little fruit fly, and I saw it like flying around the camera, and all of a sudden I think it just went into my mouth. That's really gross. Sorry, guys. Okay, so this happened to my daughter the other day. And it's karma for me because I was teasing her because she swallowed a little fruit fly on accident too. And I was like, it's got protein. It's good for you. Okay, so speaking of karma. Okay, so at the moment of a lunar eclipse, it's more or less potent depending on where it's at in your chart. If it's closely conjoined to any planets, if it's closely conjoined to any angles, if it's in an angular house, those are the top 3 things to look for. Closely conjoined, not aspecting, closely conjoined to a planet, closely conjoined to an angle, or in an angular house by whole sign. Those are going to be the more potent eclipses, typically speaking. And that's for solar or lunar. But so when you have a lunar eclipse, it is a sign of circumstances changing dramatically, and often in a way that makes us feel like it's something beyond our control, the realm of flux. So that's a quick breakdown. Now, what's the difference between the north node and the south node, generally speaking? Well, when the moon is on the upward rise, crossing the ecliptic, moving upward, we associate that with gain or increase or ambition. And sometimes people will associate it with the future, though that's not always correct. Ambition, sort of by default, points us towards something in the future, but people take it too literally and then say that the north node represents future things that you need to do or things that should be accomplished in the future. That's not really historically accurate way of understanding the nodes. It's fine. People, can come up with new interpretations and new ways of doing things. It's just that's not really a part of the way that traditional astrologers look at the nodes. So the north node, generally speaking, is gain, for good or bad, because in this realm of fortune, when things are on the upward tick, it's like a little bit like Jupiter. There can be gain and abundance, but is that gain or abundance good or bad? Well, it's hard to say. It's totally contextual. Like I always use this example because I heard someone use it a long time ago. I don't remember who used it, but they said, you don't want to see a tumor grow. Right? So it's not like every single thing that could grow in the world is necessarily good. Greed can grow, pride can grow, envy can grow. So, but it's growth and it's movement upward with usually an association of ambition and worldly achievement or aspiration connected with it. And so when modern astrologers say the North Node represents, your soul mission, ancient astrologers might just say, well, not really. I mean, your soul mission should be to enlighten yourself. Your worldly ambitions it could represent, but there's really nothing that makes your worldly ambition good unless it's tethered to or dovetailed with the spiritual intention to enlighten yourself. So, and even then you have to be very careful because the North Node in Indian astrology, Rahu, typically has more of a connotation of like worldly lust associated with it. Like, I want the best possible circumstances. I want the best possible outcomes for me selfishly. That's what Rahu's associated with. Very, very basically, just kind of putting it as simply as possible. Now, the South Node, where the moon's heading down, you're crossing the ecliptic on the downward path, and that was associated with decline or decrease, for better or worse. And so, again, everything that decreases is not bad. Some things that decrease are bad. If your crops decrease because of drought, that's kind of a bummer. But if your tumor decreases because of, chemo or radiation or some kind of therapy, well, that would be a good thing. If your attachment to worldly things decreases, that could be a very good thing. However, if you're detaching from the world through a heroin needle, that could be a very bad thing. So ancient astrologers, whether you're in the West or the East, had a very relative way of understanding the relative fortune or misfortune of the North or South node, because they basically just mean increase or decrease in the relative world of circumstance. Generally speaking, we tend to associate increase with desire, gain, lust, ambition, and achievement. We tend to associate decrease with loss or destruction or decay or disease or, things like that, or disappointment, or even death. On the other hand, Indian astrologers associated the South Node, though it was not necessarily a benefic planet, but it is more associated with the tendency to be detached from worldly things and to separate from worldly ambitions, perhaps for spiritual pursuits. So it's funny because if you're looking at it from the actual progenitors of karmic science, the north node of the moon would be slightly more dangerous for you than your south node, because the north node is broadly associated with material ambitions, whereas the south node, broadly speaking, is associated with dissociation or detachment from worldly things. Now, either could be malefic, though. That's the problem, is that both were demons in the Indian tradition. And there's a long story associated with it that I've done lots of videos on in the past. The gist of it, though, is that if you're trying to, if your baseline is, I'm not happy, I want to be happy, and that's just like baseline selfishness. The north node might represent the ambitions that I'm going to go after to try to be happy. The south node might be the way that I'm going to try to check out or escape from the bummer of the material world, but still just as selfishly as if I were pursuing, a pot of gold. So you have to be careful, because either the tendency to have everything in this world or to reject this world are selfish impulses, according to this esoteric philosophy. What does that mean? It means the middle path. What's the middle path? This is the path of yoga. It's the path of the bodhisattvas. It's the path where, we learn to see in this world the divine images reflected. We learn how to embody the noblest ideals. We learn to be following our destiny while detached from results. I mean, whether you're a Taoist, a Sufi, a mystical Christian, a yogi, it's the same kind of thing that all of these traditions talk about. Of course, they express them in very different ways. The philosophies are, very complex and different from one another in really interesting ways too, but that's something that's shared by each tradition. So at any rate, that's just a little background on the nodes. So now let's bring it all the way back around to the south node. What does a south node lunar eclipse mean? Well, it means decrease, decline, dissociation, detachment, potential for loss, but also that otherworldliness, or that sense of letting go and searching for something that's not of this world. And then we have, remember, the moon in Sagittarius as its full moon, representing a culmination of circumstances that will lead to some detachment, dissociation, loss, decline, need for otherworldliness, and it's disposed of by Jupiter in the double-bodied water sign of the fish. So what does that point to? To me, it points to the need for relinquishment of certain things in life that are bumming us out, and a return to faith, a return. There's a search for something bigger, some unitive principle or ideal, some philosophy, a return to our morals, a return to our sense of conviction. But this is a compassionate conviction. It's a diversified conviction, meaning it's not blind to its own shadows. It's fully aware of its own mysteries. It's like, how do you find faith in something while understanding the shortcomings or the question marks surrounding your faith or your convictions? And this eclipse is giving us an opportunity for something like that, because it's an eclipse that just beckons for some restoration of faith, philosophy, otherworldliness, learning. There's a call to something beyond. And at the same time, this isn't the call of like a zealot. It's not. It doesn't feel to me like it. I guess it could be, but it feels to me like the positivity of Jupiter being in Pisces right now. It's a very embodied place for Jupiter. It's a very sensitive place, and it's harder for Jupiter and Pisces, say, compared to Jupiter and Sagittarius, to get overly confident and to develop that tunnel vision about its beliefs or convictions. So I like this as a moment of healing of our worldviews, of our beliefs, the need to return to some higher principles or thoughts or education or teachers or practices, because we're seeing that something isn't working or something is falling apart in some area of our life, or we've been away for too long. So I see that as kind of maybe the highest promise of this eclipse. But of course, you're also going to see, just garden variety lunar eclipse on the south node, which will indicate some degree of decrease or loss or diminishment. It could be very positive. It could be very negative. Kind of depends on the placement. So that's okay. So that's I wanted to just dig into the nodes, dig into the sun and the moon, kind of remind us of what's going on with this eclipse a little bit. And now what I'd like to do just for fun is maybe take a chart or two and try to unpack it for you and give you some tips on how to interpret them through some demos in the audience. So I need time, date, and location of birth. Someone in the chat box is saying, I'm bored. Well, you're not paid to be here, so you can leave at any point in time if you want to. Okay. Let's see. Okay. I am going to scroll down here and let's see what I've got. Man, the chat's going so fast. I can't even I need a first name with it too. If you could give your first name, just like a first name along with sun, moon, or along with your time, date, and location of birth. Karen. We're going to go with Come Alive Art Studios, Karen. Karen was born on November 5th, 1976 at 1:49 p.m. in Sacramento. And okay, I'm going to pull this chart onto the screen here, getting it set up right now. Thank you for your patience. And okay, Karen, thank you so much for volunteering your chart. I'm just going to give everyone some tips for how to interpret eclipses by using your chart, and then I'll do one more after yours as well. So everyone should be able to see Karen's natal chart on the screen right now. And let me just check to make sure. Okay. I'm just checking to make sure that it's there. Okay, good, it is. Alrighty, so what we're going to do is we're going to just plug the eclipse into Karen's chart. So the eclipse is happening right around the, 5 degree marker, I believe, of Sagittarius. It was maybe 4 or 5. So it's falling right about here in Karen's chart. That's her 11th house, and it's falling pretty near to the midheaven. Anytime I get it within, 3 to 4 degrees, that's ideal for me. 1 to 2 is really strong. If it's within 7 or 8 as it is here, I'm like, okay, it's close-ish. So I put it into kind of like a middling strength category because it is close to a degree marker. So I'm going to write these things down so that you guys can use them at home. Number 1 on my list of considerations is the eclipse conjunct a natal planet. And so that's number 1 consideration. 2 is the eclipse conjunct an angle. And 3 is the eclipse in an angular house. So these are my 3 guidelines that I use. And of course, other astrologers may have other, steps that they take or particular methods that they use. But this is what I do. Having identified these, that's going to tell me, okay, how powerful is the eclipse? In this case, I would say because the eclipse is somewhat close to an angle, I'm going to put this in a sort of middling category in terms of strength or intensity. So once I've done that, then I want to understand the house topics. So in this case, for Karen, we have the 11th house. So friends, groups, allies, benefactors, assets, or resources for one's career or ambitions. These are the topics that were broadly speaking associated with the 11th house. So when I see a lunar eclipse there, I know that things are reaching a peak, a place of culmination in terms of the karmic experiences that Karen is having right now in her life with regard to friends or groups of people or allies in her life or benefactors or different kinds of assets or resources that have been there for her or are manifesting in some very dramatic way right now in relation to her career. So what resources or assets do you have for your career or your ambitions in the world? And how are they really showing up right now, really manifesting in a very bright, more dramatic way? Or how are some of those assets, friends, groups, resources, how are they changing at the moment? How are they reaching, maybe they're reaching their expiration date with a lunar eclipse, especially remember the South Node, that sense of diminishment that can be there. Are certain people in your life diminishing in importance or relevance? Are certain groups that you've identified with just no longer doing it for you? It doesn't necessarily have to be like some big breakup socially, but how is your social life changing right now? These are the kinds of things that I would look for. Now, with the eclipse sort of close to the midheaven, I would say that the potential for this to impact you in slightly more dramatic, more visible ways is there. The midheaven is a degree at which a planet is, at the highest place in the sky, so to speak. So it's a very dramatic sort of visible quality in the midheaven. It's like that's where the sun is at high noon. So you have this kind of high noon feeling to the planet, to the eclipse. So it could be that these changes socially or around professional relationships are a little bit more public, a little bit more pronounced, a little bit more dramatic, or that it has affecting your reputation or your public image in some way. Sometimes people are going to associate that with one's career. You could do that. But I would be a little bit more inclined to saying that things at the midheaven tend to be a little bit more public or more visible and more potent or strong than that could be. For a lot of people, the public is going to be the domain of their career. And so it's logical to suggest that for a lot of people that will involve career, but it's not that the midheaven is necessarily all about career. And this is something I take a lot of time to differentiate in my courses too. So that's the first thing that I would say here is just, watch for this area of your life right now being quite dramatic. Now, context is everything. So here's the second part of what I would do. So that's the first delineation. There's culminating changes happening around groups, friends, social connections, maybe something more public or visible. And this could be also drawing you to something a little bit more otherworldly through the South Node dynamic, through the Jupiterian qualities as well. Jupiter has just ingressed into your second house of resources, money. I really like that for you right now in terms of just some positive momentum, perhaps professionally or financially, or in terms of like a business or something like that. At the same time, what I'm noticing is that Uranus is moving through the opposition to Mercury and the Sun in your 10th house, while Saturn is moving into the square with them in your 10th house. So when I put all of that together, now I can create a full interpretation. So if you kind of delineate your eclipse first, and then second, you delineate your surrounding transits, that's when you start getting a really robust interpretation. So for example, let's just take Uranus opposite the Sun. I'm just going to go Uranus op Sun. And that's going to equal, let's say, the need for individuating change, revolution in career, disruptions to the ideal image of your career. So remember, I said the Sun has something to do with an ideal image for our lives as a whole. The Sun in the 10th getting an opposition from Uranus could be that the desire to revolutionize your sense of purpose or ambition, especially with regard to your career, because the sun is in the 10th house, could be at hand right now. Uranus likes to shake things up, and Uranus says, I need to be free. I need to be free from previous ways of doing things. I want to innovate. I want to be original. I want to disrupt the status quo. And it's pressing on that sense of purpose, sense of power or authority. It could be relating Uranus opposite the sun to challenges in authority or to your own authority, or challenges to your ideal image or ambitions professionally. But it's wanting to revolutionize and shake things up, and could be a little bit defiant in the mix. Now we're just going to throw Mercury in there and say, like, but Mercury and the sun are sort of like sticky tape together in your chart. So you could throw Mercury in, but I'm going to just keep it simple and focus on the sun. Now we go forward to Saturn square the sun, Saturn square sun. What does that mean? Well, Saturn square the sun from the first house to the 10th is very similar to Uranus, except for where Uranus wants to revolutionize and create change and have kind of defiant originality. Saturn square the sun is going to be about discipline. It's going to be about looking at where we're falling short, where we need to be more serious, how we need to become more mature. So we're going to put maturity, discipline, hard choices, we'll call it a serious crossroad, or also themes of exhaustion or hard labor. And so if you think of Saturn and the sun, you could also think about kind of like the birthing crisis, the contractions of the birth experience. So there's a real contractive energy around the sun in your career house, while Uranus is also really trying to shake things up in your career house at the same time. Those two forces, contraction and then the desire for sudden rapid change and growth, are pulling on each other right now in your career. Now, all of that is happening within the context of the lunar eclipse in your 11th, which would signal to me that resources for your career, people around you in the workplace, groups of people in your life, friends, allies, colleagues, something changing there, and it's happening. It's being dovetailed with these pressures that are trying to force change in the professional dimension of your life, a refined image, a change in authority, a change in structure of how you work. Different kind of ideals that are trying to install themselves in your life right now. And this is also playing right into the sort of social dimension that probably surrounds your work life. Okay, so if Karen were my client, we would talk at this point and have a conversation, because then she can kind of modify and say, well, that's not really happening, but this thing is happening. And then I can kind of recontextualize if I need to, and we can keep digging into the interpretation and maybe give some advice about how to handle things and stuff like that. But that's a simple way, is, break down the intensity of the eclipse, look at the topics that the eclipse should be activating, and then next to that, contextualize them within the biggest transits currently happening in your chart right now. And I'm just touching the surface here because there's other planets doing other things in your chart at the same time. So you can add and complexify as much or as little as you feel ready for. This is something that I teach in both of my programs. It's kind of, how do you stage out the level of complexity or sophistication that you can handle interpreting as an astrologer. Many of the reasons we fail as students of astrology is not because we suck at astrology, it's because we're trying to do too many things too quickly. So one of the keys to success when becoming an astrologer or learning how to read charts is in learning how to do no more than what you can actually do, and then gradually building so that you can do more, but doing it little by little so you don't overwhelm yourself. Because that what that leads to is feeling like everything gets really soupy. You start losing focus. You're not as concise. You're not as accurate. You feel like you're seeing millions of possibilities and you don't know how to narrow them down. So one of the big keys to success in astrology is learning simple techniques and tactics and building on them until you're really confident with them, and then adding more factors. Sort of like saying, look, start with a 3-card tarot spread. Don't feel like you need to do a 12-card tarot spread or a Celtic cross right away. Get used to interactions of the basics in a kind of a tighter framework, and then as you get more comfortable with that, adding more becomes easier. So anyway, Thank you again, Karen, for sharing your chart. I'm going to do one more example and we'll do the exact same thing and just sort of repeat it. Holy crap, the chat box is moving like, that's crazy. Crazy. I don't think I've ever seen the chat box flying like that. That's nuts. So, okay, anyway, I'm going to take one more and then we will do again. Let's see. We're going to go with Jackie from East Meadow, New York. Thank you, Jackie. All right, I'm going to put your chart up on the screen. And I don't, like I said, I don't think I've ever seen the chat box like fly. I think the chat box actually crashed. Okay. Where did you go? Oh God. Now I have to find it. I don't know if I'm ever going to find it. Oh, I know it was like right here and I grabbed it. Jackie, here it is. Okay. Jackie. Jacqueline. Okay. July 27th, 1984. And oh no, Jackie, you didn't give me your time. Jackie, no, you didn't give me your time. East Meadow. I'm going to see if I can scroll down and get it from you. East Meadow, New York. Okay, so Jackie, if you are in the chat box, what, Jackie, what's your time? Can you put your time in for me? 3:30. Got it. Got it, Jackie. We saved the day. Jackie, was that 3:30 a.m. or p.m.? You need to give me full information here, my dear. Jackie, 3:30 a.m. Okay, thank you. Okay. You can tell I'm up. Okay, here we go. All right, I'm putting it up on the screen right now. So I just have to see if it is appearing on the screen. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Jackie. We did it. All right, so let's take a look at where, ooh, we got a fun one. This is a nodal return for Jackie. So, and in difficult houses too. The 6th and the 12th, which can be, those are challenging houses. And the eclipses in these houses, especially when they're returning to the same positions that they were in when you were born, those are some very significant changes happening. That's another thing I should add to my list. In fact, remember the list: planet, eclipse closely conjoined to planet, closely conjoined in angle or in an angular house. And the fourth one is, are they happening in the same signs that they were happening in when you were born? Is it a nodal return, or perhaps a flip nodal return, which in other words, in this case, Jackie was born with the North Node in Gemini, South Node in Sag. North Node in Gemini, you could have it flipped where the North Node is in Sag and the South Node is in Gemini. And those would also be potent eclipses, but most potent is the actual return. In this case, North Node in the sky right now is in Gemini, as it was when Jackie was born. South Node is in Sagittarius, as it was when Jackie was born. This eclipse fell very close, in fact, just 2 degrees off from the actual South Node, or roughly 2 degrees. So right on that South Node of the moon. And of course, this might change a little bit depending on if you use the mean or true node, but yeah, that's the gist of it. So a lunar eclipse in the 6th house on the South Node of the moon. That's powerful. This is one of your this is one of your more destined eclipse events in your life. There's many of them, but this is one of them. When it comes that close to the actual South Node, that's a big deal. All right, so what would I anticipate from this one? Well, let's start with 6th house topics. So the 6th house was traditionally associated with illness, disease, labor, or hard work, frustration, conflict, strife, misery, fun. So don't worry, we'll make it better. Illness, disease, labor, hard work, frustration, conflict, strife, misery, slavery. It was also associated with, let's say, like war. So this house was called the Joy of Mars, and it was called Mala Fortuna, bad fortune. Now, Mars rejoices in this house. That gives you some hint about the nature of the house. So time potentially for conflicts with a South Node lunar eclipse happening in this house. A time of hard work, sometimes not the kind of work where you see a lot of recognition for the labor, at least not right away. It was associated with warriors or soldiers and war and battle and like armed conflict, and to a certain extent Mars as the god who's also associated with martyrs, people who will die for a cause. So you think about the causes that you are fighting for in your life right now. You think about the strife or conflicts that you're dealing with, and you think about different kinds of frustrations or elements of struggle. You think about hard work and labor, and also the things that you're serving. Not the sixth house is not a house of service in any, it's service through sacrifice, and usually through loss and through, like for example, if you think of the sixth house as a medic on a battlefield, or if you think of the sixth house as an ER nurse, or if you think of the sixth house as someone who is helping to serve others, but in environments that are filled with strife and struggle and like misery, that's the sixth. It can be a very hardworking house, a house that has a lot of very noble, courageous qualities and self-sacrificing qualities, but you can't strip away the hardship of the sixth. You can't whitewash it. Now the way that we make it more positive is by understanding, well, what are the potential benefits that could come out of whatever kind of conflicts are there? The ruler of your sixth house is a fallen Jupiter retrograde in the seventh. Makes me wonder if, certain key relationships in your life right now aren't changing because of ideological conflicts or struggles, or if the need for, if different kinds of work in your life, things that have been a source of frustration or challenge or difficulty, aren't peaking and aren't ready to change in some way, perhaps very positively for you, because the ruler of this eclipse, Jupiter, has just entered your ninth house, the place of higher education, religion, gurus, teachers, long journeys, foreign places. But I think Jupiter entering your ninth house with the peaking South Node eclipse in the sixth is like, maybe it's time to set aside some old struggles, or maybe there's been old conflicts, old miseries. Maybe you've been a slave to something internally, within yourself, and maybe it's time to be free. Maybe there's going to be new teachers or lessons or learning or insights entering your life as Jupiter, the ruler of the eclipse, is entering the ninth house in a very positive place while opposing Mercury in your third house. Jupiter's currently opposing Mercury in your chart down here. Could that lead to some kind of, learning or education or changing of your heart or mind? Could you be sometimes you're going to see this eclipse as the culmination of, writing a dissertation, or some culmination of taking a test and finishing something that's been a lot of work and labor, in the realm of like learning or training for something. Could you be building something that you're teaching to other people? So I like the idea of like hard labor around education or learning, or starting to set aside some kind of period of turbulence, starting to let it go because new wisdom is coming into your life. That's kind of the initial thing that comes to me. We're running out of time, so I don't have more time in which to break it down. I do wonder about key relationships changing in your life at the exact same time, because the ruler of the eclipse, Jupiter, in your natal chart, the ruler of that sixth house and South Node, is fallen in the seventh place of love and relationships. So I also wonder about it because you've got relationships and social dimension of your life changing, if not now, then in the year ahead, as Uranus and Saturn are also about to go through opposition and square to Venus, who is naturally related to love and relationships as well. So I wonder about, conflicts of belief or ideology or faith, or needing to share more than you're currently sharing with people in your life around your spiritual values or something like that, because of the placement of Jupiter and because of upcoming tension to Venus in the chart as well. But at any rate, Jackie, thank you for letting me just riff off from that really quick. I went through that really quickly because I'm running out of time, but hopefully you got the gist of it, which is that look at the house of the eclipse, look at surrounding transit context in the chart, and you can put together some basic interpretations that usually get a lot of mileage out of. So that's what I've got for today. Thank you all for joining me live. This was a hoot. I really enjoyed it. I enjoy getting to see all of you. The chat box was kind of crazy today. Remember, my new course, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic, comes up on June 13th. If you like this kind of stuff, if you like learning, I'm just giving you simple little things. My program is very structured. It's 2 years long. So the first year program, many people end up taking the second year as well. But the first year program and my second year program start in June. So you have to be an alumni of the first year program to take the second year. My horary class also starts in June. Check it all out on my website. If you have any questions, you can go to website is nightlightastrology.com. Email me info@nightlightastrology.com, and me or my assistant Delia will be glad to help you. So that's what I've got for today. I hope you guys had a great lunar eclipse. Hopefully get some insights, go take a look at your chart, get some more ideas about what might be going on for you. And share your stories in the chat box. I love